Welcome to the Guide to Final Approach module of the A320 RNP AR e-learning. We're on the final approach now for the end of our course, with only this module and 2 more to go, plus our quiz at the end that you will need to pass. Our objectives in this module are: 1. To understand when final APP guidance mode can be used. 2. To study how the final APP mode is used. And 3. To answer frequently asked questions on final APP mode. Final APP is a managed lateral and vertical guidance mode dedicated to the final descent segment of non-precision approaches. Final APP guidance is available from the decel pseudo waypoint down to the applicable minima or missed approach point MAP. This common mode is a combination of APP nav, lateral guidance mode, and final vertical guidance mode. In the first part of this module, we will look at the question, can I use final APP? We will explore the limitations along with the arming and engagement conditions. Requirements for the navigation database can be found in the Airbus Airworthiness Compliance document. For example, the one for RNP AR 0.3. In particular, all navigation data to be used for RNP AR operations shall be referenced to WGS 84 Earth model, or an analysis shall be performed to show the adequacy of the data with the navigation system. Means to check that RNP AR procedures are not modified at each AIRAC cycle also need to be implemented. This is an important aspect even if the NDB is obtained from an approved supplier. The flight crew must respect the FCOM limitations, the FCOM SOPs, the FCOM temporary revisions, and operations engineering bulletins, if any, and the applicable company policy. You must refer to your company documentation to get the limitations corresponding to your aircraft. As for any other approach, the flight crew must check the associated flight plan, but several points must be reinforced. No modifications, including altitude constraints, from the final approach fix or the vertical intercept point to the missed approach point or runway are allowed. When the final approach fix is the to waypoint, the from waypoint must not be cleared. The final APP, final and APP nav arming conditions are: 1. The aircraft is above 400 feet AGL, and 2. The flight plan is valid with lateral and vertical profiles, and 3. The active flight plan has selected a non-ILS approach, and 4. Go-around mode is not engaged. Here are the final approach engagement conditions. Final is armed by pressing approach on the FCU. APP nav is engaged and the cross track is less than 1.5 nautical miles. The aircraft is within the capture area of the vertical profile. from below constraint altitude up to constraint altitude plus 150 feet. Predictions are available, and the approach phase is activated and the deceleration point has been sequenced. Also, the aircraft intercepts a descending leg of the vertical flight path. Note: approach phase may have to be manually activated on the MCDU perf page if the approach starts at high altitude above aerodrome level. For example, RNP AR operations. Now, in the second part of this module, we will look at the question, how do we use final APP? We will look at flight plan verification, stabilization before the final descent point, as well as arming, engagement, and monitoring guidance. Note: in this course, the term final descent point is used as the point where the FMS will start the final descent. The vertical intercept point is the position in the procedure where the final descent starts. The final approach fix is a procedure design waypoint. It's displayed on the charts and indicates the start of the final approach segment. Most of the time, they are the same physical waypoint. Flight path angle segment and final descent point identification. The flight crew must identify the flight path angle segment, the final descent point position, the intermediate approach altitude, and the missed approach point. The FDP is the FMS waypoint at which an FPA segment starts, for example, -3 degrees. This waypoint always has a coded altitude constraint that may be at or above, for example, plus 3,000 feet. This constraint is displayed on the ND in magenta, next to the corresponding waypoint. When the constraint key is selected on the electronic flight instrument control panel. It is also shown on the vertical revision page at this waypoint. Arming final APP. Final APP will arm by pressing the approach mode push button on the FCU with the active flight plan containing a non-precision approach. As per standard operating procedure, the approach can be armed when 1. The aircraft is cleared for approach, and 2. The to waypoint is the FDP. Arming final APP when previously in nav mode. On the FMA, nav will be replaced by APP nav, and final will appear as an armed vertical mode. At this stage, no change will occur in the aircraft guidance. APP nav mode is equivalent to nav mode. Arming final APP when previously in heading mode. On the FMA, heading will stay as lateral active mode with APP nav displayed as lateral armed mode, and final will appear as vertical armed mode. At this stage, no change will occur in the aircraft guidance. The lateral heading mode and active vertical mode remain unchanged. APP nav will engage when the aircraft respects the lateral capture conditions, the same conditions as for nav mode, i.e. be on track before reaching the VIP. Engagement of final APP. Final vertical mode will engage, and final APP displayed on FMA when the aircraft respects the vertical capture conditions, i.e. be at the right altitude. A blue arrow is displayed where the final descent will begin. Note, if below, the blue arrow will be shown at the interception of the descent path and not at the FDP. If the same arrow is shown in white, at least one engagement condition is not fulfilled and final APP will not engage. As you already know, the lateral deviation to the flight plan is shown by the position of the aircraft symbol relative to the flight plan and the digital cross-track displayed on the ND, and the LDEV displayed on the PFD, which is mandatory for RNP lower than 0.3. In the same way, the vertical deviation to the vertical profile is shown by VDEV on the PFD and VDEV on the MCDU prog page. So, in summary, identify the waypoint or pseudo waypoint where the final APP will engage. Ensure the decel point is sequenced and the FMS approach phase is activated. Be stabilized before the FDP. For horizontal flight plan interception, when in heading and track mode, the approach must be intercepted before the final descent point, as the final descent point should be sequenced in APP nav with the aircraft established on the final approach course. For vertical flight plan interception, be level at the specified altitude before the final descent point. Also, modification of the vertical profile, altitude or speed constraint modifications, when final APP is engaged, is prohibited. When final APP is engaged, the vertical guidance follows the vertical profile. The FCU selected altitude is disregarded. Note, when the final APP mode is engaged, a maximum vertical speed limit applies to the guidance. Limit can be reached with a strong tailwind. In this last part of the module, we will look at some of the more commonly asked questions that come up. What if I am too high before the final approach fix or final descent point? Well, final APP will not engage, so the aircraft will not descend. Therefore, bring back the aircraft on profile before the final approach fix or final descent point using the appropriate vertical mode. What if I am below the specified altitude at the final approach fix or the final descent point? To answer this, with an aircraft below the FMS flight path altitude, for example the aircraft is vectored at 2,000 feet when the start of the final descent is coded at 3,000 feet, then final APP will engage and the aircraft will descend when intercepting the FMS profile at the position of the blue arrow. What if final APP is not engaging at the final approach fix or final descent point? When all precautions have been taken, including the aircraft is positioned laterally and vertically with respect to the flight plan, approach phase is active, APP nav is active and final is armed, blue arrow is displayed ahead of the aircraft. Then, if all these precautions have been taken, final APP should engage as planned. What if final APP is not engaging at the VIP and as a result the aircraft has remained level? When all precautions have been taken and final APP fails to engage, so that consequently the aircraft remains level and flies past the VIP, then this may have come from one or more of the engagement conditions having not been matched, or a problem has occurred with the FMS profile computation or the approach coding. In which case, consider discontinuing the instrument approach procedure unless a required visual reference can be maintained through the approach. Final app has armed, but the FMS approach phase has not yet activated. The FMA display will be correct, as the arming conditions are met. The lateral guidance is also correct. However, the top of descent symbol on the ND will remain white, because all the final APP engagement conditions are not met. Therefore, the final vertical mode will not engage and the aircraft will maintain its altitude and fly past the VIP. What if final APP is armed but the FMS predictions are not available? Missing predictions can be due to the absence of one parameter, such as aircraft weight or cost index. The crew will detect that predictions are missing by the display of dashes on the flight plan page. FMA displays will be correct, as well as the lateral guidance. The top of descent symbol on the ND will remain in white, while it should turn blue when final APP is armed with all conditions respected. The final vertical mode will not engage in this situation, even if the aircraft respects the other vertical capture conditions. What if the approach starts at a high altitude above the destination airport elevation? There is no maximum altitude for the use of final APP. But when the decel point is located more than 7,200 feet above aerodrome level, or 9,500 feet above aerodrome level, depending on FMS standards, the FMS approach phase will not activate automatically when sequencing the deceleration point. Therefore, the activation has to be done manually through the MCDU. Otherwise, final APP will not engage. The actual temperature is below the published minimum temperature for the selected non-precision approach. Can I use final APP? The FMS vertical profile is based on barometric reference, baro VNAV. The FMS does not apply temperature corrections to the computed approach profile. Consequently, final APP cannot be used when the actual temperature is below the published minimum temperature for the intended non-precision approach, and or if temperature corrections are required. We have now covered the objectives that we had at the start of this module. To understand when final APP guidance mode can be used. To study how the final APP mode is used. And to answer frequently asked questions on final APP mode.